Alright y'all, welcome back to Commando Arms channel. So as you guys can already tell, we are checking out Jeremy Clarkson's documentary about the raid on Saint Nazaire. Now I will say this is probably the most requested video ever on my channel. Now I did a small reaction to Operation Chariot previously, which was the raid on Saint Nazaire, but I really want to check out the documentary again because I've seen the documentary that Jeremy Clarkson did on the Victoria Cross and it was just fantastic. So I figured this one's going to be pretty good. And again, it was very, very highly requested. So I'm really, really excited to check it out. Now, this video is almost certain to get copyright claimed. So if you guys could help me out and subscribe down below, I would really appreciate it. And also hit that thumbs up. But yeah, it's about 58 minutes long. So we'll get right into it. So yeah, it should be a good one.
A couple of years ago, I made a TV program about my father-in-law who won a Victoria Cross at Arnhem. And since then, I've been on the hunt for a follow-up, another nugget of incredible heroism in the face of impossible odds. Of course, most war stories are well known, well documented, and well celebrated. The Battle of Britain, Rorke's Drift, and so on. But one day, while trolling through a second-hand bookshop, I came across a story that's hardly known or celebrated at all.
I gotta say, I don't think I've ever seen a secondhand bookshop in the US. So the fact that he was able to go there and sort of find these old stories and whatnot is actually really, really cool. Again, I did spend some time in England. I didn't get to see like everything, but I kind of wish I was able to go to one of these stores because that would, I mean, you probably uncover some pretty fantastic history there.
It's the story of an amazing battle, a battle where more VCs were earned more quickly than any other action in the Second World War. It's a story full of ingenuity, pluck, and genuine courage.
I love the footage.
It had the lot. Having read it, I decided to do some digging. And it turned out that while very few people in the outside world know anything about this extraordinary battle, they certainly do in military circles. And they call it the greatest raid of all.
Yep, you guys certainly know about it. Man, I really, really love the old school footage.
In 1941, the Battle of Britain was won, but the Battle of the Atlantic was still raging, and we were losing. German U-boats were running amok among the convoys bringing supplies from America.
What's even cooler with this old footage is you can see they've really like enhanced the sounds. And again, that really helps for documentaries like this because you can really get immersed in it. Because again, he's sort of setting the framework for everything that's about to happen and everything that's happened so far in World War II.
America. 9 million tons of shipping had already been sunk and the shipyards in Britain simply couldn't replace it fast enough. Britain was beginning to starve.
Oh, snap.
Winston Churchill said in his diaries, the only thing that truly frightened me in the war was the U-boat peril. Said he was even more anxious about the Battle of the Atlantic than he was about the Battle of Britain. And then into the equation sailed the Tirpitz.
Oh yeah, a beast, like the Bismarck.
Tirpitz was the fastest and most modern battleship in the war. Even though her armor was a foot thick, she could thunder along at 30 knots. And with 8 15-inch guns, she packed a huge punch.
Yeah, no kidding.
Certainly, the Royal Navy had very little in its arsenal to take on a ship of this magnitude. And that was a nightmare for the people who worked here in Churchill's war rooms. Each of these dots on this map represents a convoy movement. If Tirpitz got among them beyond the range of the Royal Air Force, we would almost certainly lose the war. It was that simple.
That is really cool.
There was, however, a drawback to Tirpitz's size. You see, if she were to be damaged while out in the middle of the Atlantic, she couldn't very well go back to Germany for repairs because that would mean limping past Britain, past the RAF, past our coastal fleet, and that would be a death sentence for her. So she'd have to go to a dry dock on the Atlantic coast of France. But there was only one dry dock on the Atlantic coast of France, that was big enough to handle a ship of Tirpitz's size. This one.
Oh, it's awesome he gets to go to all the places, too.
This is the Normandy dock in Saint-Nazaire. It had been built in the 30s when France was making giant ocean liners.
Dang, that's
and
a
now,
big dry
to make
dock.
sure the Tirpitz could never have a home on the Atlantic seaboard.
Okay, so when I used to work with submarines, we had a dry dock as well. If I can get a picture, I'll post it up here. But anyway, the submarines are massive, so the dry dock was pretty massive. But this one here looks freaking insane. Like, it's really awesome he gets to go to these places because you can sort of see the magnitude of everything. And if you're not able to see the ship itself, just seeing the dry dock that it gets all the maintenance in gives you a pretty good idea of how big this thing actually was.
It had to be destroyed.
Now, the only way that you could put this dock out of action is to destroy this gate. And that
Just
was a
flood
problem.
it.
It couldn't be done with a naval bombardment because the mouth of the estuary is actually 6 miles away in that direction. It couldn't be done with a submarine because this whole area was crisscrossed with anti-submarine nets. Couldn't be done over land because northern France was in German hands, and for 2 reasons, it couldn't be done from the air either.
Dang. That's a really good position.
Firstly, Second World War bombing raids were notoriously inaccurate. Only 22% of bombs landed within 5 miles of the target.
What? No way. Dude, that's insane. 5 miles? How high were they dropping the bombs?
So the chances of being able to hit a dock gate from 6,000 feet in the sky were slim at the best of times.
Wow. Holy cow.
And it wouldn't be the best of times because right next door to the dry dock were 14 U-boat pens.
Say 14 or 40? I mean, that's still a lot regardless, I guess.
These were some of the most precious facilities in the German armory. And to protect them, the Saint-Nazaire area bristled with 80 anti-aircraft guns and artillery pieces.
Holy cow.
And in the town itself, there were 5,000 troops.
Again, the magnitude of World War II is like pretty insane. But again, this is just one place, and we're talking about all this equipment. It's kind of hard to fathom.
Destroying the dock then using conventional forces, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, out of the question. So, the job was given to a group of men who really had only just been put together.
All right.
The commandos.
Hell yeah. Okay, I guess the music got copyright claimed. It happens.
The commandos were the brainchild of Churchill, who'd seen similar outfits operate successfully in both the Boer War and the First World War. A small number of highly trained soldiers would get in fast, do a huge amount of damage, and then get out before the enemy had time to get organized.
Yes.
Churchill
Really
liked
cool.
this. He called it the butcher and bolt approach.
Huh.
So what kind of men were they?
Badasses.
Well, if popular myth is anything to go by, they were lantern-jawed killing machines who could headbutt their way through oak doors. The reality, though, was rather different. What they represented was a complete revolution in the concept of soldiering. Because they were chosen for their individuality, their intelligence, their initiative.
Yeah.
And
that's a
nobody
good point.
embodied that ethos more than this man, Mickey Byrne.
I've got his autobiography here, and what a life. He had a privileged upbringing, Winchester, Oxford, and then he met Guy Burgess, the chap who went on to become a Soviet spy, and they became lovers. Mickey, became a Nazi sympathizer, went to Germany, met Hitler, got a signed copy of Mein Kampf, and was one of the very first people to be shown around Dachau, the concentration camp.
Ooh.
He knew Bertrand Russell, he knew Audrey Hepburn, he knew the King and Queen, he even met Roosevelt.
Wow.
He really was a Telegraph obituary writer's wet dream.
But all things considered, not the sort of man you'd expect to find in a commando's green beret. By the start
Especially
of
with
the
that
war, however,
upbringing,
Mickey
yeah.
had seen the Nazi threat for what it really was, and had found something else to suit his maverick streak. The commandos.
All
People
right.
were left to make up their own minds. In war, anybody, everybody.
Oh,
may be
dang.
killed.
This is
and
cool.
what decides the action may be the action of a private soldier who's left to command a trench. It wasn't put like that, but the feeling we were given that every single one of us might be as important as a brigadier.
That's
We were-
cool. Just imagine all the stories he could tell. It'd be, I mean, again, they could make a movie out of this one person, which is like pretty insane. And again, with that sort of upbringing, going to the commandos, like he honestly had a lot to lose, but it's kind of cool to see the personality behind someone that makes something like the
All
commandos.
individuals, you know. Discipline did matter, of course, but I wouldn't have said it was absolutely first.
The commando forces were
said.
made up of volunteers from any of the regular army units, and the philosophy of how they went about their daily business was a million miles from that of the conventional military. For a start, they didn't bother with barracks or regimental headquarters because the commandos didn't want to waste training time on mundane chores such as cleaning or maintenance. Instead, they simply got digs in a nearby town. And there was no sergeant major on hand to tell them what to do every minute of the day.
Instead of saying parade tomorrow on the main square in Weymouth, it might be parade tomorrow at 10 o'clock on these in the marketplace at Dorchester, and find your own bloody way there. You know.
Nice.
You weren't
That's
shouting
cool.
at. There wasn't any of this shouting or bullying or anything that you got in the regular army. You led by example. So, you know, the officer had to do everything that you did.
That's awesome. Again, those are like the best units that you can go to when like the officers and the non-commissioned officers really lead by example and kind of just do everything, because there's not really that sense of entitlement. They'll do all the dirty work with the lower enlisted people, and it always works out a lot better. You get way more respect that way.
I can do it, if the officers can do it.
Unfortunately, though, the British Army top brass were a deeply conservative bunch, and they really didn't like the new commando philosophy.
The regular army
Dang.
were doing their best to get us disbanded. They hated us, some of them. We were a nuisance.
And because
No
our
doubt,
standards
yeah.
were so
The
high,
hate.
we creamed off the best of the people in the regiments. And in fact, a lot of COs refused to allow people to volunteer.
This resistance by the regular
Wow.
army certainly got Churchill's back up. What I have here is a letter he wrote to the Secretary of State for War.
Oh,
and he
snap.
says, I hear that the whole position of the commandos is being questioned. They've been told no more recruiting and that their future is in the melting pot. Says he feels very strongly about this. Says the defeat of France by Germany was accomplished by an incredibly small number of highly equipped elite, while the dull mass of the German army came on behind. And then here, for every reason, therefore, we must develop the commando idea.
That's a good point. Yeah, good example.
Pretty clear cut.
Wonder how it worked out.
As 1941 drew to a close, Japan joined the war, and the Royal Navy had to send a fleet to the Far East. So there was even less to hold the Tirpitz at bay. What's more, we were losing the
What are
battle
those, like
of the
satchel
Atlantic.
charges?
We were losing in North Africa, and London was in ruins. So if Churchill's commandos really could smash up Saint-Nazaire, it might give a sense back home that Britain wasn't finished just yet.
Again, it is a lot cooler that I actually went to England, and I did see a lot of the places that were actually affected during World War II. So again, I'm not from England. I didn't live in the UK, so it's not as personal for me seeing this sort of footage, but I can really respect it a little bit more actually seeing places firsthand.
Everywhere almost we were on retreat, and people were really becoming negative, and Churchill wanted something which would be successful aggression.
The plan to destroy the 1,500-ton dock gate was codenamed Operation Chariot, and it was certainly bold. The commandos would get hold of a couple of destroyers from somewhere and sail them from Cornwall over to western France. Now, one of these destroyers would be filled with explosives. And while the RAF distracted the Germans with a bombing raid over Saint-Nazaire, they would somehow sneak it up the estuary without being seen
by anyone in the gun emplacements here, here,
That's
here,
so bold.
here, 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 and here. Or by anyone with a searchlight here, here.
Oh, man.
And then, to see what happens next, we have to turn to the actual model built to plan the raid. The destroyer, with the explosives in
This
it,
is so
would
cool,
ram
man.
the dock gates here, and the commandos would jump off, and right underneath all the guns positioned to protect the U-boat pens here, they'd run around, shooting anything that moved, and blowing up anything that didn't. Then, after the destroyer exploded, destroying the lock gate, they'd all meet here at this not at all exposed jetty and get back on the second destroyer, which somehow wouldn't have been blown to pieces while it was hanging around in the estuary for a couple of hours waiting for them to finish. It would then sail back down the estuary, past all the guns, and go home.
Seeing the map and seeing the plan like this really helps to sort of understand like the people that would actually volunteer for something like this. And yeah, it just goes to show that commandos were a different breed of people for sure.
Right.
That's so cool.
The plan was presented to the War Office by Louis Mountbatten, head of the Combined Operations Unit. And unsurprisingly, it met resistance. One commander-in-chief was particularly vocal.
I remember we started the meeting by saying, well, Dickie, old cock, if you're prepared to lose all your soldiers and all your ships, I suppose you can take on this task, which I regard as absolutely impossible. I said, it's the fact that it is regarded as impossible, which makes it possible. The Germans will never think we'll attempt it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's some reasoning there.
Mountbatten's enthusiasm certainly didn't rub off on the RAF.
You can see here in these Operation Chariot minutes that the powers that be requested a force
so
of about
cool.
100 aircraft for the diversionary bombing raid in 3
Wow.
waves. But on the back, Vice Marshal Saunby says, I don't agree that such a heavy scale of attack is needed. We want about 20 Whitleys, which are bombers, hanging around overhead, dropping an occasional bomb. And he's backed up by one of his advisors, this chap called Willits, who really says that Operation Chariot can whistle for their 100 bombers. He says Bomber Command can provide no more than 35 aircraft without prejudicing their other commitments.
Dang. It's not
You
nearly
might
what
have
they
thought
planned
the
for.
Navy would be keen, especially since the operation was designed to neutralize the Tirpitz.
But no.
Of course.
Commander-in-Chief here from Plymouth Command writes, the plan entails the sacrifice of the landing party and endangers 2 valuable ships for a small chance of success. He actually says negligible chance here. There's another guy writing here who says, I'm not hopeful as regards the result of the impact between the destroyer and the lock gates. I think the lock gates will remain partially intact and the destroyer will look silly. If that happens, much of the proposed plan fails.
It's so cool that they actually got all these documents.
Eventually, though, the Navy did find one boat. It was called HMS Campbelltown, a clapped-out American World War I destroyer that was on loan to the British. She was not ideal for the job, known for her poor slow-speed maneuverability and her large turning circle. But these drawbacks didn't dampen the spirits of the commandos.
Yes.
I thought we would get away with it, that I would be wounded romantically and a beautiful nurse would look after me in hospital. I was very young.
You were doing all this
Wow.
heavy training and nothing's happening, so very frustrated. So I think when we were finally briefed on the model, I mean, we thought, well, hell, this is going to be something.
We
Yeah,
had
no
been
kidding.
trained, both in the dark, blindfolded in the day, in every form of demolition to do with dock demolitions, trains, and anything. So when we heard that we were going to blow up the dock installations at Saint-Nazaire, I suppose really It was a feeling of elation.
At this
Of course,
stage,
from the commandos,
people
yeah.
were saying, well, what do you think? To me, you see. And I said, it's going to be a piece of cake. We're going to go in there and knock them for six, because that reflected the optimistic attitude. We were going to go in there, blow up this bloody dock, and we'll be out.
Man, just for a crazy time like World War II, where you don't really have the opportunity to decide if you want to serve or not, for these guys to go a little bit further to volunteer for this and then volunteer for this mission is like, it's pretty insane. Again, they were young, so maybe they didn't really like care so much, or maybe they just felt like they were like invincible. But it gets to a point in World War II where you have to sort of realize it, and these guys probably understood the dangers pretty well, and they kind of just went and did it anyway, because again, they're pretty confident in themselves, pretty confident to the people on their left and on their right, so it's pretty cool.
We had volunteered, after all, for danger. And it did seem an off chance that it was impossible, and therefore it would succeed.
As the commandos prepared on land, the Navy set about the Campbelltown. The old tub would have to sneak past 80 gun emplacements on its way up the Saint Nazaire
That's
estuary,
insane.
so it had to be disguised, and they only had 12 days to do the work. In the end, they removed 2 funnels and sloped the other 2 backwards, so at a glance it looked a bit like a German destroyer. And then there was the
smart.
problem of turning it into a time bomb. This job was given to a brilliant young naval officer called Lieutenant Nigel Tirpitz. He was a shy chap with a stammer who, when his girlfriend announced that she'd become fond of him, replied, "Well, then I suppose we shall have to get married." However, while he was not desperately confident with women, he was a whiz with explosives, one of the best students the Dartmouth Naval College had ever seen. But even he faced difficulties with how you turn a whole ship into a bomb.
It's probably not been done before, at least a ship like that.
The first problem he had was deciding where in the ship to place the explosives. Because you see, if you can imagine, this is the gate to the dock.
Yeah, so for me, it seems pretty simple, you know, just pack it full of explosives, or maybe put more of the explosives towards the front or the side that's actually going to be going near the gate. But again, I wasn't planning this. I'm not like some brilliant naval officer. I'm sure there's a lot of like details you need to hash out before you just decide on something like that.
This is the ship. What's going to happen after it hits? I mean, is it just going to end up here, in which case you want the bomb in the front? Or is it going to rear up, in which case you want the bomb sort of in the middle, toward the bottom? I suppose theoretically it would be possible, if the ship were going fast enough, for it to actually ride right over the top of the gate and end up in the dock itself.
Could even hit it and like turn too.
Who knew?
Day and night, Tirpitz struggled with this until he decided on a spot 40 feet back from the prow, low down, next to the keel. Then he had to work out how to set the explosives off. Back then there was no accurate timing device, so he had to use fuses, like this.
What in tarnation is that?
The idea is that you squeeze the top part here, which breaks a glass capsule on the inside, releasing acid that then slowly burns through a strip of wire.
Okay.
Now, when that snaps, it releases a spring which boings out, setting off the detonator.
It's pretty complicated.
Now, this was very advanced in 1942, but there were a couple of problems. First of all, it was very susceptible to jolts and shock. You wouldn't, for instance, want to ram some lock gates at 25 miles an hour with
Might
one
not
of
be
these
the
on board,
best.
because it might go off instantly, killing everyone. It was also very vague. The strength of the acid varied from fuse to fuse, the strength of the wire varied, the tension of the spring varied. Tirpitz couldn't say to within an hour when the bomb might actually go off.
Wow. Oh, that's pretty scary.
Choosing what explosive to use, however, was fairly straightforward. He went for amatol, and to show how big a bang that produces, we've placed a pound of
let's see
something
it.
similar between the front seats of this car.
3, 2, 1, fire in. Well, it
That
started
was a
it.
pound. Tirpitz was going to use 4¼ tons. Still,
That was 1
even if
pound.
the explosives and the fuses
What?
could be trusted to work properly, and even if they could get across to France without being detected and up the estuary without being blown to smithereens, and even if the Campbelltown could hit the lock gates exactly right and the commandos could get off and do whatever it is they had to do, they still had a problem. How do they get home again?
Because the Navy wouldn't provide a second destroyer, they were instead given 16 of these.
16, okay.
Today, this Fairmile ML is a tourist boat taking trippers around Tor Bay, and certainly it's better suited to this than it ever was for Operation Chariot.
I wonder if that's one that they actually
It was a
used in
cheap,
operation.
mass production boat designed primarily to make the Navy look bigger than it really was.
Dang. There's something so cool about like old school shipbuilding where they're actually like curving the wood and it gets like the perfect fit. I don't know. You must have had like some really skilled people, and I'm sure they got paid a pretty decent amount to actually do all that woodworking and stuff, because it just looks really, really impressive. Like all the old school ships, it's so awesome when you can actually see one in person and see the craftsmanship that goes into it. It's really inspiring stuff.
May God speed all who sail in her.
It certainly wasn't particularly good in the open sea. It tended to roll badly in a swell, which
snap.
made everyone on board queasy.
Yeah.
It's not so bad if it was only used to bring the soldiers home, but this little fleet would also be used to get half the commandos out to Saint-Nazaire as well.
It's like drifting.
So there'd be
Jeez, look at that.
15 commandos wedged down here with all their kit. And when they got to the other end, they'd be expected to get out and start fighting immediately.
It's a jury.
There wasn't only seasickness to worry about, because while each ship had small guns fore and aft,
Fast.
it didn't have any armor.
No, really. All that stood between the German guns and the men down here were, a few planks of wood.
Oh yeah, no kidding, huh?
And to make matters worse, each boat was fitted with 2 500-gallon long-range fuel tanks, which were completely exposed on the deck. Campbelltown was a bomb on
Sketchy.
purpose. These things, they were bombs by accident. Honestly, it's hard to think of any vessel less well-suited to the job in hand.
What's a little backup bomb if
Commandos
you needed
were
it, I
hard
guess.
men, good fighters. But they'd been picked for their intelligence as well, so they must have known that the chances of getting to Saint-Nazaire were small. The chances of doing the job were microscopic. And the chances of them getting home again on a wooden boat, groaning under the weight of exposed fuel tanks past an alerted enemy were virtually non-existent.
Yeah, it doesn't sound so good when you put it that way.
That Operation Chariot, for the vast majority, was going to be a one-way ticket.
We were all of us told if we wanted to leave a letter for our next of kin or our loved ones, you could do so, and you wrote on the envelope to be posted in the event of my failing to return.
It's a hard thing to do.
And there was one, Sergeant Bill Gibson, who I knew them all very well indeed. And I remember seeing his face, and I knew he was going to be killed.
My dearest Dad, by the time you get this, I shall be one of the many who have sacrificed their unimportant lives for what little ideals we may have. I can only hope that by laying down my life, the generations to come might in some way remember us and benefit by what we've done. At a time like this, I turn to you, Dad, and God. I hope there will be peace for everyone soon. My love to everyone. I'll remember you. Your loving son, Bill.
What a fucking legend, dude. Holy cow.
To write your last letter to your parents. No, my attitude was I'm coming back.
So many badasses.
Two
Holy shit.
of men came to me and said, would you take these letters home to our wives if we're killed? And I said, but wait a minute, I'm going with you. Oh, you won't be killed, I said. They were both killed.
That's so weird.
The Saint-Nazaire raiders weren't allowed to reveal details of the operation to their loved ones. But for the bomb designer Nigel Tirpitz, recently married and the father of a young son, The thought of keeping his wife in the dark was too much. So he told her. And she said afterwards they both sort of knew he wouldn't be coming back.
Dang. It's crazy how they almost like know it. You kind of see that a lot with World War II.
So as the commandos gathered here in Falmouth in Cornwall, ready to join the Campbelltown and the little boats that were anchored out there in the bay, Lord Mountbatten gathered them all together, and very unusually, he said to them that any man who wanted to step down could walk away without a stain on his character. Not one of them did.
Of course not. Sheesh.
At 2 p.m. on the 26th of March, 1942, the Armada set sail, with 264 commandos and 357 Navy personnel on board.
Yeah,
that's
a lot of people.
Of 621 men. Only 227 would come back.
I had just enough light to read a book that I was reading, and I just concentrated on reading this book.
Wow.
All that crosses your mind is...
Just imagine, like, you have all these people. It's a pretty big raid. Like, even for World War II standards, it's a pretty massive raid. But then just like the thought of preparing for this and trying to get your mind ready for that is one thing. But then you actually set sail, and all of a sudden you're pretty much just waiting to get to your destination so you can start doing all this stuff. And just imagine the thoughts that are going through your head then, because there's no going back then. And they're reading, they're playing cards and whatnot. It's pretty crazy to think they're able to take their mind off of it for even a second. So I'm going to stop the video right here and split it up into 2 parts. Hopefully that'll prevent the video from getting blocked. So we'll try that. And yeah, I guess I will see you guys in the next part, which I'll probably upload tomorrow. I'll just set it up like that. So I will see you guys in part 2.